Chapter 27. A Lake Retreat. When David showed me the paper he had found, I panicked. What if there were more men out there looking for us? I'll never know how many they sent, or why they felt it was so important to get us back. All I knew was that the note listed descriptions of Aaron and me, along with the names of our family and friends. They knew where we came from, and months after we escaped, they were still looking for us. Going home was suddenly a walk in the wrong direction. Jess's journal. David hesitated for several hours. Then finally, when they stopped to rest and eat a bit of food, he got up the courage to show Jess the note he had discovered on one of the bodies. The paper had been folded several times and was well worn, but Jess and Aaron's names had both been on it, along with a physical description of each girl and the town of Belton as their expected destination. The soldiers had been looking for them. He didn't know why, and that scared him. "I found this on one of the soldiers." He handed the paper to her and watched her read it. The color drained from her face. "Do you think there might be others?" Jess said nothing in response. She stared at the paper for a long time, reading and rereading the few words until she had the note, even the shape of the letter formations firmly fixed in her mind. They finished eating, and Jacob fussed in the wrap. Jess changed his diaper, wrapped him back against her, and began walking without a word to David or Tina. Soon after, east turned to due south as they discovered the first of scores of bodies. There had been fighting here recently, a few days at most, and the smell from the corpses was sickening. Tina whimpered in fear and hid her face in her brother's shirt as they skirted around the dead. Quincy's tail stayed permanently tucked between her legs, and she walked as close as possible to Jess, her ears flattened, her body tense. Jess wondered if the bodies belonged to some of the troops who had passed through Clinton recently. It seemed safer to head south for now. As they turned south, the northwestern edge of Harry Truman Lake appeared, and due to the inability to head east unless they wanted to swim, they hugged the lake edge and continued south, away from Belton, yet again. It was sunset when they made camp on a bluff overlooking the reservoir. Decades ago, the U.S. Corps of Engineers had purposely flooded sections of the low-lying valley, creating Truman Lake. In the distance, tips of dead, drowned trees poked up from the middle of the water. Even the top of a chimney could be seen. It was an old homestead that had long been abandoned, and then submerged when the waters flooded the valley. They didn't dare build a fire. The highway, probably Highway 7 from Jess's quick review of the map they had found in a broken-down truck, was also within view. What they could see of the highway, someone on the highway could likely also see of them. No reason to take chances. Again, Jess forced herself to eat. There wasn't much, and because they couldn't build a fire, she let Quincy eat the rabbit she had flushed out and caught shortly before they stopped for the night. The young dog eagerly tore into her meal. They slept huddled close that night. It was warm, not oppressively so, but warm enough. Still, they needed to feel safe, needed to hear the breath of another living person and feel their presence close. Life was so fleeting, so painfully short at times. They needed each other more than ever before. So they slept, deeply, without dreams or nightmares, on that bluff, legs and arms intertwined, bodies curled close. Keeping the small band together and safe overrode Jess's desire to head home. They continued south the next day, keeping the water's edge within sight at all times. It was late and almost time to stop for dinner and camp for the night when David commented on the strange tree. It was bent twice at nearly perfect right angles. "This tree is weird." Weird or not, it was a reasonable place to stop. The sun would soon be setting, and it was time to scrounge for food. Quincy had disappeared into the brush to the west, probably hunting for a rabbit or squirrel. They heard her give one short, quick bark. David had been picking from bushes and digging up little plants all along the way. All of his studies of the now filthy, dog-eared, and ragged book were paying off. He could easily identify plantain, cattail, wild onion, fiddlehead ferns, oxalis, and a host of other edible plants. As they walked, he would suddenly stop and dig something up and stick it into his pack. The long-bladed shovel he found at the farmhouse had become his walking stick and was never far from his reach. Tina had begun to help as well, and when they stopped for any length of time, both children would forage a little, always within sight, and pick up what plants they could to supplement the dwindling supply of canned food. As Jess began to search through the cans for dinner, David continued to study the strangely formed tree with interest. It was such a specific deformity, and there was nothing in sight that indicated why it would be shaped that way. "It's like it's pointing to something," David commented, unable to stop staring at the tree. An unexpected voice answered, "It is pointing at something. That, young man, is what the Osage call a thong tree." The owner of the voice was a bright-eyed old woman who leaned on a walking stick and blended seamlessly into the trees 20 feet away. A rifle was strapped to her back, and her dark eyes sparkled beneath a crown of white hair pulled into a loose bun. Wisps of her hair hung freely. She was slim, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans with solid, no-nonsense hiking boots on her feet. Quincy squirmed in excitement at her feet. Apparently, she had found a person instead of the usual rabbit or squirrel. David jumped in response, and the rest of them froze in place, but it was hard to be afraid of one little old woman, especially with Quincy's relaxed, canine confidence in the stranger. Jess scanned the rest of the woods surrounding them and saw no one. When her gaze returned to the old woman, she saw long, deep lines etched in her face. It was hard to keep her guard up. The old woman looked friendly and had reached down to scratch Quincy behind the ears. The dog leaned a floppy-eared head against the woman's jeans. Jess spoke first. Hi." David spoke as well. "Why's it called a thong tree? And who are the Osage?" The old woman laughed then, and the lines in her face deepened as she did. The children relaxed for the first time in a long time. Here was someone who was not a threat. "Well, I'm Osage, little one, and the rest is better explained a short walk from here." She glanced up at the sky. "Rain is coming." She turned and began walking west, away from the lake's edge, stopping only briefly to glance back and crook a bony finger at the group. "Come this way, then." Quincy bounded after her, and a moment later so did Jess and the kids, lugging the packs they had recently shed from their backs. It was odd. She hadn't even introduced herself, yet the little group followed her wordlessly. Through the clearing and into the deep woods they walked. A winding path, with several sharp zigs and zags, was barely visible unless you knew what to look for. It eventually led to the base of a wide-mouthed, low-ceilinged cave. Seconds after they followed the old woman inside of the cave, the skies outside darkened, rumbled ominously, and then opened up and began to pour rain. Thanks to the rain and clouds, the inside of the cave appeared dim. After bending slightly to pass under an overhanging rock, the ceiling raised above Jess's head. It was about 12 feet high in this main outer chamber. Ahead of them, it closed down again to a dimly lit opening in the back. There appeared to be some kind of light source on the other side. They kept to the path on the left and avoided the deep holes dug on the right-hand side. It appeared to be an archaeological dig site in process. Pickets and string sectioned off areas in meter squares, delineating one section from the next. Signs labeled each square, and in some of the sections there were spearheads or pot shards laid out, and the exact position they had been discovered and excavated. Jess and the children followed the old woman back through this outer chamber. Through the small man-height opening, Jess could see that the light source, judging from the water dripping down on one edge, was a natural skylight that reached all the way up through the cave ceiling. This inner chamber was immense, and there were several other smaller dig sites at regular intervals throughout. It was obvious that the old woman lived here as well. There was a section with a table, several chairs, and some stacks of boxes and containers, all situated away from the falling water, but close to the skylight. The rain came in and pooled in a lagoon the size of the front chamber, then flowed away along a rocky stream toward the pitch-black rear of the cave. The old woman stopped near the campfire located across from her living area. She stirred the embers and gently placed another log on to burn. A spit held 3 blackened lumps above the crackling fire. It was difficult to tell, but Jess guessed it was probably squirrel. She spoke then, as she moved from the fire to the supplies nearby. "Not much meat for all of you, but I wasn't really expecting company. I can cook up some ramen, and I'm sure I've got some other goodies in here to add to it." She opened boxes and handed a saucepan to David. "Fill it up with rainwater there and put it on the fire, Mince." She smiled, and her teeth were white and perfect. "My name is Dr. Madeline Fallingwater, but you can call me Madge. Let's get some dinner, and then we'll have story time." Jess wasn't sure what to think of the old woman, or of story time, but at that moment Jacob signaled he was awake, hungry, and ready for a change by wailing loud and long. She pulled him out of her wrap, where he had been hidden from sight, and Madge moved faster than it seemed possible for a woman her age. Before Jess could object, Jacob was lifted from her arms with a cry of joy and a barrage of words in a strange guttural language. Oddly, the baby stopped crying immediately and stared at the old woman intensely, watching and listening to everything she said. She unwrapped his coverings, clucked over his wet and bulging diaper, and immediately set him on a coat on the cave floor and changed him, reaching impatiently for the clean diaper which Jess found and handed to her after a bit of scrambling. Madge then swept him up in her arms and spoke rapidly in the foreign language to the infant, cooing and kissing, and then handing him back to Jess to nurse. She pointed a slender, bony finger at Tina. "Little one, Nidawi, go out to the front of the cave and pick as many dandelions as you can find." She gave the little girl a soft push back towards the entrance to the cave and pulled Jess by her free hand to a chair set apart from the others in one corner. "Here, child. Sit here and give your son his dinner." Jess sat in the chair and let out a small groan of pleasure. It was a canvas sling, suspended on a wooden frame and then lined with soft furs. It felt delicious. She arranged her wraps, offered Jacob her breast, and settled back, blissfully content in the most comfortable seat she had sat in since the week at old Cooper's place. Her eyes closed, and she slowly drifted towards sleep as the others moved about the cave preparing dinner. Jess was startled awake by a steaming cup of tea thrust under her nose a half-hour later. The tea was followed by a hearty bowl of ramen noodles, thick with dandelion greens and small bits of savory squirrel meat floating in it. They ate in shifts, for there were only 2 bowls. The light from the natural skylight had dimmed and disappeared as night fell. The fire was built up, and they made little niches of blankets or backpacks to curl up against and stare at the old woman. She had promised them a story, after all. She reached over and plucked Jacob from Jess's arms, cuddling and cooing at him, and began to speak. One day, the chief of the Quiet Earth people was hunting in the forest. He was looking for a symbol to give life to his people. He came upon the tracks of a giant deer, and he became very excited. "Grandfather Deer," he said, "surely you will show yourself to me. You will be the symbol of my people." He followed the tracks. His eyes were on nothing else as he followed those tracks, and he ran fast through the forest. Suddenly, he ran right into a huge spider web that stretched between the trees across the trail. When he got up, he was terribly angry. He struck at the spider who was sitting on the edge of the web, but the spider jumped out of reach. Then the spider spoke. "Grandson," the spider said, "why do you run through the woods looking at nothing but the ground?" The chief felt foolish, but he answered, "I was following the tracks of a great deer," the chief said. "I am seeking a symbol of strength for my people." "I can be such a symbol," said the spider. "How can you be a symbol of strength?" said the chief. "You are small and weak, and I didn't even see you as I followed the great deer." "Grandson," said the spider, "look upon me. I am patient. I watch and I wait. Then all things come to me. If your people learn this, they will be strong indeed." The chief saw that this was so, and so the spider became one of the symbols of the people. Madge looked around. Tina was nearly asleep, curled in a ball near the old woman's feet. David was staring attentively, and Jess was nearly asleep herself. She smiled at David. "What did you think of the story?" He didn't smile. Instead, he looked sad. David thought of the old farmhouse and the blood and of Aaron. In his memory, so fresh and raw, he could still hear Jess's screams as she held her friend's hand. "I should have watched and waited more, but I didn't, and then Aaron died." The old woman nodded slowly. Jess opened her eyes, stared at David and Madge, but said nothing. She wondered where this was going. The old woman's voice was kind and matter-of-fact. "This happens. Many have died this past year, and even more will die in the months and years to come. You are young. You are Minsei, the bow. You bend and you learn and grow strong. You stay alive, and someday you will be Kuruch, the bear." She smiled at him, then made a fierce face and growled playfully, her wrinkled hands imitating the claws of the bear. "You will be a fierce warrior, but you must first learn patience to watch and wait for the right moment. This will make you a strong man someday." Madge nodded then at Jess and stroked Jacob's sleeping cheek. "You too are young, but you and your family have seen much hardship. Will you tell me your story?" David interjected. "We aren't family. Jess and Aaron found Tina and me in Clinton. Our parents died, and Aaron is dead now too. The soldiers killed her." The old woman stared at David for a moment. "Minsei, you are all family now. In the past, my people warred with other tribes. When too many of the warriors died, my tribe would go out and take people from other tribes to adopt and bring into the tribe so that our numbers did not dwindle and be gone forever from this world. You have found each other, bonded together in a common need, and this means that you are family." She reached down and stroked Tina's hair. "But it is late, and you are all tired. Let us share more stories tomorrow when our bodies are well rested." She pulled herself upright and brought Jacob back to Jess, watching approvingly as Jess carefully folded the infant back into the sling without waking him. She showed them a sleeping chamber that branched off to the left of the large inner chamber. They were surprised to see that the sleeping chamber had 6 cots in it. Only one cot had blankets, and it was obviously Madge's cot. Jess and David looked at each other in the flickering lantern light. It felt as if they had hit the jackpot. First they had eaten a hot, satisfying dinner, and now they each had an actual bed to sleep in. They smiled for the first time in days. Madge bustled about and reached into a box and pulled out blankets for each of them. David went back and woke up Tina and held her hand as she stumbled sleepily into the small dark chamber. Madge had lain down on her cot and hummed some wordless song for a few minutes, lulling them into sleep. All that could be heard after that was the occasional pop or spit from the fire and the soft splashing of rain.